Okay, I think we are ready to begin. So
domestic furnishings in those days was the buffet.
I would like to ask everyone to please mute yourselves so that we don't have any interference from when other people are talking.
To have managed it.
Perfect. Good. Okay, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to this event organized by the students of the Center for British Studies, Humboldt University Berlin. My name is Anisia Petcu. I am a lecturer and researcher here at the center, and I coordinated our MA students in the documentation and implementation of this project. Every year, our students are given the chance to learn about the practical side of culture and cultural project management by conceptualizing and creating an event themselves. And what you are now going to attend is the launch of their project this year. It is my pleasure, therefore, to welcome you to the online film projection and Q&A session, which marks the launch of our online exhibition, Britons in Berlin, an exploration through the senses. I will not say much more about tonight, as I will leave Hasti Shahri, one of our student project managers, to introduce our two guests for the night, as well as our schedule. We have a very interesting night ahead of us, and I'm sure you will soon discover this. And without further ado, Hasti, please.
Thank you very much, Anisia. So I would like to welcome everyone. We are very honored to have Barbara Loftus and Barbara Wünnenberg with us this evening. Barbara Loftus is a figurative painter, filmmaker, and a creator across the land and the water. And she has spent years exploring the memories of her German mother and the history of the maternal family she has never known. Her mother, Hildegard, was born into a German Jewish family and grew up in Berlin throughout the 1920s and the early years of the Nazi regime. In 1939, Hildegard was able to escape Nazi Germany and settle in England. Her parents, Sigismund and Hertha Basch, and her younger brother, Heinz, were forced to stay behind in the family home in what was then Berlin-Charlottenburg. In December of 1942, they were deported from Berlin to Auschwitz and murdered at the camp. The surviving daughter, Hildegard, remained in England and for decades did not talk about the details of her family history or her memories of pre-war Berlin. She broke her silence one day in 1994 by telling her daughter Barbara Loftus about a memory of two uniformed Nazis entering the family's apartment in Berlin and confiscating their valuables. This memory started Barbara Loftus on her journey of documenting and exploring her family's past through her art. This film is the outcome of this dedication and years of research and artistic work by Barbara Loftus. Barbara Loftus' paintings have been shown at Stadtmuseum Berlin and the Jugendmuseum Schönenberg and Freud Museum London, among others. She is currently working on her third book publication, which will be released later this year. We are also honored to have Barbara Wünnenberg with us. Barbara Wünnenberg is a researcher with a PhD thesis about to be published in comparative literature from Humboldt University Berlin and King's College London. She has written her PhD thesis on British writers in Germany during the Weimar Republic and has previously worked for a Holocaust research project at the Institute for Contemporary History in Berlin. She was introduced to Barbara Loftus by her PhD supervisor in London in 2016. Since then, she has done extensive research for Barbara Loftus's film and her upcoming publication, particularly into the history of the Basch family home in Berlin, and assisted with translations and image research. We will start the event with a conversation between Barbara Loftus and Barbara Wünnenberg about the research behind the film and the process of it. After that, we will watch the film, then we will have an interview with Barbara Loftus, and later, Barbara Loftus will answer questions asked by the audience. So I think we should start now with the conversation. Barbara Wünnenberg, if you could please, thank you.
Thank you very much, Hasti, for the introduction. I would like to start by sharing my screen with you. Okay, I hope you can all see this. Yeah, good. So this is an opening. The opening image is a still from the film that we will watch together in just a few minutes. But first, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an impression of setting the scene of Barbara's family's relationship with Berlin and this the kind of research that we did together on the family's roots in Berlin. I would like to start by showing you and one of Barbara's paintings. This is Lieder ohne Worte, Songs Without Words from 2013. So you can see it's a 3-part paintings of a triptych that depicts one of the paintings of Barbara, which depict the interior of the family home in Berlin, as imagined and reconstructed by Barbara over the years. And in the center image, you can see sort of this quite pleasant domestic scene of a little girl reading on the floor of the living room while her mother is playing the piano. This little girl is Barbara's mother, Hildegard Basch, as imagined by Barbara as a little girl listening to her mother play the piano, which is based on and also on the recollection of her mother. So her mother had this recollection that there was a piano in the family home and that her mother used to play it. And then there's sort of a split painting on either side of this central image that depicts some men carrying down removing the same piano from the family apartment and carrying it down the stairs of the apartment building. This is based on the fact that Barbara came across a document in a Berlin archive, which was sort of a Nazi document that listed all the belongings, the furniture, and everything that was left behind in the family apartment after the deportation of Barbara's grandparents and her uncle in 1942. Among those things was the piano. So this is how this painting sort of combines the childhood memory of her mother, of this quite idyllic, scene of, listen to the grandmother, Barbara's grandmother play the piano, with the later quite sort of violent removal of all of the traces of the family from the apartment in Berlin, from the house, and from the city itself. As Hasti mentioned in the introduction, the family home was located in Keithstraße, which was then Charlottenburg, is now Schöneberg. I would just like to give you a little bit of an impression of what this area used to look like before the war and then also after the war. So here on the left, you can see 2 images of Wittenbergplatz, which was sort of the station and square closest to Keithstraße, and Nollendorfplatz, which was sort of on the other side, so towards the east. So the street was located between these 2 squares, which are also 2 stops on the U-Bahn. And then on the left, you can see what the same area looked like just after the war. This is just to give you sort of an idea. I mean, for those who maybe don't live in Berlin or are very familiar with Berlin, of the extent of the destruction that happened, that occurred during the war, and what this means for someone who is now trying to come into this city and trying to reconstruct what her family's life would have looked like in the 1920s or 1930s, as a task that is made sometimes impossible by the extent of just the changes that have occurred in the city's landscape and the amount of destruction during the war. And so this is where we sort of often get into sort of the realm of maybe imagination, speculation, trying to find out what could things have looked like, but there's often no certainty. If you know this area, you will know that both of these U-Bahn stations have been reconstructed to at least somewhat resemble what they look like here in the pre-war images, but obviously all the area around us looks completely different now. Here we have a map of pre-war Berlin depicting just this area where the Basch family lived. You can see Wittenbergplatz and Nollendorfplatz stations in red, and then the little black cross is where the house Keithstraße 14 was located, where the family apartment was. You can see on the left some images that I included just to give you an idea of how central and sort of lively, exciting this area was in the interwar period, particularly in the Weimar Republic era. Sorry, you can see, if you look at the map again on the left, top left, you see a little blue pin. That's the location of the Romanisches Café. I included an image on the left. So if you have ever read something about pre-war Berlin, I'm sure you've come across the Romanisches Café as this sort of meeting place of all the intellectual, anyone who was anyone went to the Romanisches Café, artists, writers, publishers, film stars, scientists to some extent, and as you can see, it was quite close to where Barbara's family lived. And if you then return to the little black cross where the house was located, and you walk south, cross Kleiststraße, this big central street there, walk a little bit down Lutherstraße, the street on the bottom, then you would also come across two more institutions of sort of 1920s Berlin that I included on the left, on the right, sorry. There's the Scala, which was a very sort of prominent variety theater that put on huge, expensive shows with lots and lots of dancers. You can see some of them in the bottom image on the right. And then just across the street from there was the El Dorado Transvestite Club. That's one of, I mean, the most, certainly the most well-known and probably also the least authentic of the very many sort of queer entertainment venues of the Weimar Republic era. I did my PhD research on British writers who came to Berlin, and basically almost everyone mentions this kind of, this phenomenon, and especially the El Dorado was sort of the place where this kind of entertainment was quite commercialized quite early on, and sort of tourists would go there frequently to look at this scandalous aspect of Berlin. And all of these institutions also have in common that they were affected by the Nazi takeover in 1933. So the Romanisches Café obviously was very quickly bereft of any interesting inhabitants, because almost all of them went into exile. The El Dorado was closed by the Nazis, and the Scala, because it was majority owned by Jewish businessmen, was expropriated by the Nazis, but kept as an entertainment venue throughout the Nazi era. There's, if you sort of now go walk on the map back up to Kleiststraße, in the 1920s, you would have found that actually in the very street that Barbara's family's apartment was located just across the street from the building, at 17 Keitstraße, there was another well-known institution of the late 1920s and early 30s, the Jockey Club or Jockey Bar, which was frequented by everyone from Marlene Dietrich to Bertolt Brecht to Klaus and Erika Mann, and also Christopher Isherwood. If you know anything about British writers in the Weimar Republic, you would know, that he lived in this area as well. And this is so close to the house of the Basch family that I think they would have been able to see the comings and goings of this place from their balcony. Before it was a bar, it was actually a Russian restaurant. So this is another aspect of this area of Berlin, is that it was also the place where the Russian emigres came to settled in the 1920s. And actually, Barbara has a memory of her mother. One of her mother's memories is that the family for some time had a lodger who was, or at least claimed to be, he probably was a Russian prince from the Galitzin dynasty, so very famous Russian family. And I think Barbara, I'm not sure, maybe she can clarify later, but I think she suspects that he would have hung out in this bar. I would like to now move to, if we're basically standing in front of Jockey Club, we can turn around, then we would face 14 Keitstraße. Here we have some images of the building itself. The one on the left is an image that I found very much by accident. It was a very happy accident in one of the Berlin archives. It shows the building just after the war, and you can see that it was extensively damaged. I believe it was damaged during one of the bombings, and there was a fire, and that's why you can see that at least the top part is very, very, very damaged and partially reconstructed. In the middle top center image, you can see what the building looks like today. It's not the pretty one on the right, it's actually the white one on the left, which, as you can see, is so modernized that there's, apart from the door, there's basically nothing left of the original features. And then on the right, you can see what the front door looks like today. And on the bottom right, that's an image of the front door that Barbara took on her first visit to Berlin in 1995. So this is what it looked like when she first encountered the building. In the center there, we have Barbara's grandfather, Sigismund Basch, sitting on the balcony of 14 Keitstraße. And here I would like to now bring in Barbara to talk a little bit more about these images and the meaning of the research or the discovery of this image of the building just after the war, and how actually this image of her grandfather was quite important for the further research to make there's an interesting connection between this image and the image of the house. Maybe Barbara, you would like to comment on that? You have to unmute yourself.
Okay. I was in the process of making a painting of my family on the balcony, loosely based on the photograph of Sigismund. And when Barbara discovered this photograph, I could see for the first time where Sigismund would have been sitting, and that is in front of the screen on the first floor, next to the woman who's hanging out washing. So that was quite important, really, just to know where he was, and also to see the state of the family apartment. As Barbara said, it was bombed in 1942, a Russian raid, and the family was still living there at that time. They were deported at the end of 1942. So I can't imagine what state the apartment was in when they were still living there, whether they were able to continue to live there. I guess they must have done, because Jews were not allowed into air raid shelters. So presumably they just stayed there. And as Barbara mentioned, the entrance doorway on the bottom right is how I saw the building in 1995 when I first visited Keitstraße. And the fact that the house was derelict at that time and everything was locked up, this was a kind of metaphor for me of the secrets that house contained, and continued in that state for some years. And the next time I saw it, it was in this modernized, reconstructed state, which had taken all the character away from the building. And now the building is, it's not residential. As far as I know, it's occupied by lawyers and accountants. And so the character is quite changed.
And the whole street is actually, I forgot to mention about the jockey bar. I think it's now an orthopedic shoe shop, isn't it?
Chiropodist, yes, yes. Actually, there's a little sort of aside regarding the Jockey Club. My mother didn't talk about those places so near to home, but when I was a teenager in a miniskirt in the 60s, it was fashionable to wear high boots. And when I asked my mother if I could have high boots, she said, "You're not having high boots because they will remind me of the prostitutes who stood in the street with the whips down their boots." So I had to do without my boots.
Should we
move on to the next?
Yeah, I think so this is basically this what you're seeing here is sort of one of the base images that Barbara used to commission an artist to actually do a sort of reconstruction of what the building would have looked like. So on the left here, you see a sketch, and then in the center, there's the finished image, and on the right, a close-up into the stairwell of the building. And on the bottom right, you can see this is one of many floor plans that I photographed in 2 different Berlin archives that show. I mean, you can look at the files of the floor plans from the beginning, from when the house was built up until. I mean, it's also documenting any changes and reconstructions that were made. So people who are good with this sort of stuff and architects, they can, from these kind of plans, reconstruct what the building would have looked like exactly, and also get the proportions right.
Yes, and my mother had described a sort of walk through the apartment when I asked her to tell me about her memories, and she described room by room the layout of the apartment, and so it's very interesting to be able to see the layout for me. And the drawing on the top right of the staircases also shows the position of the balcony and how they would have got onto the balcony, and that's where my where my grandfather was photographed.
And where your grandmother, your mother was waiting for her father as a little girl when he was returning home.
That's right. This comes up in the film.
I would like to now, sort of, to close this part, move on to one of the most recent, or the most recent painting that you can see here on the left, the application. And then on the right, there's an older one that sort of goes along with it. It's from 2013, Hertha on the Stairs. So Hertha is Barbara Loftus' grandmother, and the application shows a family, setting that I would like to ask Barbara to comment a bit on that.
Yeah, this is a kind of reconstruction and imagining of the discussion that was involved when my Uncle Heinz was trying to be got out of Germany to America, and there was an application and he was admitted to the USA, but he never got there. I guess the quotas made it impossible for him to get out in time, but he was approved to go to the USA. And so this is my imagining of that discussion, and his mother posting the letter. And this is my most recent painting, just earlier this year, painted under lockdown.
Thank you very much. So this is it, basically, unless Barbara has something to add for our part.
No, I think we should carry on.
Yes, I think we're on time also. I mean, this has been the little setting of the scene of Berlin, and the next, I will hand back to Hasti now for the film screening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I think right now we will start screening the film. Yeah, perfect.
I will just need Barbara to stop sharing her screen first. Thank you. Great. Okay, so yes, you've heard a bit about the kind of research work that has gone into Barbara's work and the significance of it. And now we're actually going to see the film that was produced. And as Hasti has already announced, afterwards we will have an interview with Barbara and the Q&A session.
Thank you very much. Of course, an amazing movie, at the same time very tragic. This is like the 4th time I'm watching it, and every single time I tear up. Okay, so let's start the questions. The first questions. First, I wanted to announce that we will have as Anisia has pointed out, we will have the Q&A part. So we will be happy to receive your questions at the end of this interview. The first question that I have is about your childhood. The film shows years of a journey of you discovering your family's stories and specifically your mother's memories and experiences. Do you believe that your own childhood experiences had an effect on how you received and explored your mother's life?
Yes, it's a very gradual process of assimilation. I was born immediately after the war. My mother was a stateless Jewish refugee, and when I was born, she was obviously in a state of high anxiety about the fate of her family. And I think from early on, I sort of knew what I didn't know, if you understand what I mean. There was something that was communicated which was very deep, and I didn't come to understand this until many, many years later, because my mother couldn't speak about her past. And in any case, in those days, people didn't want to know. England was a very different place. It wasn't the multicultural society that we have now. Everybody was white, and anyone with a German accent was seen as the enemy, whether they were Jewish or not. So this had an effect of kind of separating us from the people that we lived amongst. My father didn't really know how to deal with my mother's trauma, and he was very different. He was a lapsed Catholic from the north, Anglo-Irish, and he was very fiercely political. And so there was a lot of political conflict between my parents. He was a communist, a Stalinist, anti-Zionist, and this created a kind of gagging on my mother. She didn't feel that she could talk, and in any case, she didn't want to burden her children with the things that had happened to her. So there was a kind of conspiracy of silence for many, many years, until I was middle-aged, really. But it was there in the background, and yes, I mean, this was a formative conditioning for me, anyway. I can't speak for my brother, but that's how it was for me. Do you want to sort of go on to the next question?
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much. But for the next question, I will be also sharing my screen. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So you have recreated someone else's memories and have recreated experiences that you haven't experienced yourself. What role has interpretation had in representation of someone else's memories for you?
Well, imagination plays a big part, but the evidence that I based my desire to work on this theme is based almost entirely on my mother's voice. And when she began to talk, very unprompted, she was about 80 when she started to talk about the past, then I began to record her memories, because I realized that I could ask her questions without it upsetting her. Before then, I avoided the subject because I didn't want to open the wounds. So the evidence that I had was the voice recordings, a few photographs that she'd brought with her. And also, this is a childhood memory, the knives and forks that we see here. She brought those with her, and they stayed in my memory from childhood because we were very hard up. We lived in fairly kind of diminished circumstances. My family lived in 2 rooms. We shared a bathroom with another family. But these knives and forks, next to the ones that we had, our knives and forks were Woolworths knives and forks, and they were short and cheap. And these elegant silver pieces kind of stood in for my grandparents. She said these were the knives and forks we used at home. And I don't know why she brought them. I suppose maybe she thought they were mementos, or maybe they could be sold. But anyway, so they were one of the few physical things that she brought with her from her home. They also connected for me with one of the sources of inspiration and reference in my research has been the writings of the great Jewish cultural critic Walter Benjamin. And he writes about the home that he grew up in. I think we've got a picture, Hasti, of the...
Yep.
Yes, a Berlin childhood around 1900 was Benjamin's memories of his childhood written when he was already in exile. And he's very influenced by the writing of Marcel Proust, who looked into memory and made an epic work, Remembrance of Times Past. And Benjamin was very, very influenced by that. And I wanted to just read a short piece from this collection of memories. One of the elements that my mother described about the home was the monstrous furniture which filled the rooms, quite unlike what we know now. But these monstrous pieces of furniture had a very profound effect on Benjamin, and he wrote about them in the same way that my mother described them. One of the items of furniture in the dining room was called the buffet. And he writes this, it's not very long. The buffet, the gloomiest of all domestic furnishings in those days was the buffet. Indeed, to know what a dining room really was, to grasp its lugubrious mystery, one had to have managed at some point to gauge the disproportion between the doorway and the broad, massive buffet that rose to the ceiling. It seemed to have rights in the place it occupied there in the room. The buffet bore a well-deserved resemblance to a sacred mountain sheltering a temple. Furthermore, it could make a show of treasures such as might surround an idol. And what better occasion for this display than the day we hosted a dinner party? As early as noontime, the mountainside would be opened so that within its cavernous recesses, which were lined with velvet, as if with grey-green moss, I could see the household silver. What lay before my eyes, however, was multiplied not tenfold, but rather 20 or 30-fold. And as I gazed at the long rows of coffee spoons and knife rests, fruit knives and oyster forks, my pleasure was tinged with anxiety, lest the guests we had invited would turn out to be identical to one another, like our cutlery. So those two things, the furniture, or this piece of furniture, and the cutlery, you talked about sensory memory and the senses. The sense of the volume of these enormous pieces of furniture and the cutlery are two of the elements that I felt were important, and I wanted to explore them however I could.
Thank you very much. So I will stop sharing that photo. Okay. My next question is, you have transferred not your own sensory memory, but your mother's, and the result has been simply perfect. One can feel experiences those memories Terror himself when looking at the paintings, and especially when watching the film. How did you depict these feelings this way, and what was the most challenging when you transferred your mother's sensory memory to your work of art and communicated it to us as the audience? How can one translate between the senses, in your opinion?
Well, there was, the element of imagination, projecting myself into the time, and also a lot of research, a great deal of research, reading, visual research. But actually the concept of the senses plays a very big part in translating verbal description, verbal memory, a few photographs. There's nothing physical, there's nothing tangible. And I had to create a sense of space, a sense of volume. I mean, those are senses which we all experience, but we think of the senses as being sight, sound, touch, and smell, but we have many other senses which feed into the way that one translates a concept, an experience, an idea, a sense of scale. I mean, when you're a child, an enormous piece of furniture has a very profound impact on your memory, and these are the senses that I wanted to try to make use of.
Thank you. And as I've said, that you've done that perfectly. My next question is, you also explored your grandparents' relationship through your paintings and your mother's childhood. What was the process? What moments did you choose to illustrate, and why did you choose them?
Well, the initial experience was the involuntary memory that triggered the whole recounting of the past, which was the confiscation of the porcelain. So the image of the violation of the home, the unlocking of the cabinet. There's a lot of unlocking going on because in those days, everything was locked up. Buffets were locked, china cabinets were locked, doors were locked. So it's the idea of the unlocking of spaces, unlocking of the past. Those were the kind of concepts that I was interested in. I knew also about my grandparents' marriage, which had a lot of tensions in it. And one of my series of works was concerned with the memory that my mother had as a small child, witnessing an argument between her parents when her mother, angry at the fact that her father had become a bankrupt, snatches his pocket watch and tears it off and throws it on the floor and stamps on it. And this incident was witnessed by my mother as a little girl playing unseen under the table, and the impact that scene had on her. So that was one of the other memories. I've recently done a painting which I call the Night Fugitives, which was a kind of vision of my grandfather and Uncle Heinz having to go into hiding during the day after Kristallnacht and coming home late at night under the cover of darkness. And this was a subject that I wanted to explore. And there are others. It's a long process, and there's a lot of reworking and repeating, and it's like, for me, it's like Penelope's tapestry. It's woven, and then it's unpicked, and then it's woven again. And I don't come to the end of the subject because there's always more to find.
Thank you very much for doing this interview. Now we will do the Q&A part with Anisia. So Anisia, please, thank you.
Thank you. We already have some questions from the audience, so I'm just going to take them in turn and read them out to you, and then you can read them. So the first one is, how would you describe your relationship with Berlin, given it's the city your ancestors, your family were from, but also the place that suddenly wasn't their home anymore?
Well, I've recently been granted German citizenship, which my husband encouraged me to do this, which is a rather belated move, but that is important. And I have very dear friends in Berlin, and I associate Berlin with people that I know now, and I'm always very moved and impressed by the way that there is a greater sense of history and responsibility and awareness of German history than there is in England. It's very different, and I admire the way that Germany has faced up to its past. So I feel very happy to be in Berlin.
Thank you. The next question is, did you have to reconstruct your family tree and find distant relatives or other witnesses of the past to talk to for the contextualization and implementation of the film? Or was it really only your mother's evidence and memories that you worked with and that you drew on?
On the maternal side, there is a distant relative in America who did a big research project into the family, the maternal side of the family. On my grandfather's side, there is nothing really. I've been trying to research his family, but the trail goes cold because the records were lost during the war. So I know a lot about one side and very little about the other.
The next one is, did you already know you wanted to create an artwork when you read your mother's writing, or I suppose when she started sharing her memories? And how did you come up with the idea of creating a film in particular?
It was a natural kind of progression. I've often worked in sequential images, sequences of narrative images. So to develop it into a film was something that seemed to be a natural progression. I mean, after all, film grows out of painting, and the first filmmakers were artists, and the first photographers were artists. So there is a natural connection between the two.
The next question is, in the film, we learned your mother passed away in 2007. Had you already started this film project? Did she get the chance to see it, or has she seen any of the paintings?
She saw the paintings. She saw some earlier films, which were much simpler and where I was, just kind of feeling my way. But she did see the beginning of the work, and she was very interested. She was very pleased, and I'm very glad that she lived long enough to see some of it. It's a pity she couldn't have seen more, but she did see.
Then there's a question about the symbols that you use in the film. The visual interpretation of personal memory makes one come really close to the storyteller, and I thought this was rather exceptional, says our audience member, one of our students. I particularly liked the reoccurring and powerful image of the spider weaving its spider web. I felt that it figuratively showed how the Nazi propaganda spread across the country at the time. Was this your intention, or is there another metaphorical meaning to this message? Reading this is actually interesting because my interpretation was a bit different from this. So now I'm very curious to see what you have to say.
Well, it's kind of paradoxical, really, because obviously the spider closing in on its prey is how it was for the Jews, but also in anti-Semitic propaganda, the spider is frequently used as a symbol for the grasping Jew, and it has a long history in the imagery of anti-Semitism. The web of the spider spreading out across the world, and this kind of Jewish conspiracy. So it's a kind of paradoxical image.
I see. And the last question we have so far: how was your view on your mother and her life changed over the last 25 years by researching and visualizing her early life?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, my work coincided with my mother's old age and decline, and so there was only a few years in which I could share my progress with her before it was too late. And the last years were in a fog, really. She had very little memory, and so it was a very short time that we could share this project.
Thank you. Oh, another one. 2, 3. Okay, more questions coming in. More or less adapting to the last question. So this is the student that asked about the spider. Would you say that you changed personally from the day your mother opened up to you, meaning when she gave her letters and writings to you? And also, did that change or further identify your mother-daughter relationship? What did it teach you?
I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure of the question. I don't quite understand, but I always had a very, very close relationship with my mother, and there were no holds barred. We could talk about anything, and so she was with me 100% in whatever I wanted to do.
Then there is a question. Near the beginning of the film, Hildegard says that she did not define herself by her Jewish identity, but rather by being German. Did that change after having fled to the UK and observing what happened to the Jews and her family in particular in Nazi Germany? And did she evolve or develop a British identity after that? I once read an account of the author Judith Kerr, who wrote, for example, When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit, whose story of escaping from Hitler and the Nazis is, of course, very different, but yet she seemed to have reflected on herself as being British first and foremost. your mother go through a similar experience?
I don't know. I doubt it. I think that we are, and I feel this personally as well, that I don't fit into either German or British society. I'm sort of in some kind of displaced in between space, and I think that's how my mother always felt. She wasn't practicing. I mean, they were Jews who kept the high days of the holidays, but that was as far as it went. And for the rest of the time, they thought of themselves as Germans, and they gave their children very Teutonic names, you know, Sigismund, Hildegard. They're not exactly Jewish names, and so it was the Nazis who made them into Jews. You know, they didn't. That was a lesser part of their identity until 1933, and I guess that sense of being, you know, one of the pariah people always stayed with her. I remember when I was younger, if I was with my mother and she would sort of perhaps be looking at someone and say, "Do you think so-and-so is Jewish?" And I said, I have no idea. But it was something that was very important to her, whether she could identify a Jew or whether she looked Jewish. I think it's something that goes very deep.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions, and I think after that we will wrap up our event. The first one is, what is your relationship with the Jewish community today? Have you presented your film to a Jewish audience?
No, I haven't. I don't have any relationship with any Jewish community. I don't feel in any sense a connection with my Jewish connection. I will say that I'm working on my next film, and I have had the help and support of a very helpful, lovely rabbi who is a singer and has sung and recited a prayer for my next film. So that's been very moving, actually, very valuable, very moving.
I can imagine. There was another question that came in, so I will just quickly put that in there as well. So first, are there any artworks or films that inspired you particularly for your work? I know you talked about Walter Benjamin, but anything else maybe?
Oh gosh, where does one start? I find that quite difficult, really, to answer. There are certainly many written works which have inspired me. The diaries of Victor Klemperer, the writings of Hannah Arendt, particularly Walter Benjamin. There are many more. I think the written word has been, perhaps more influential than other people doing what I'm doing. My references belong to the history of art rather than contemporary art.
Thank you. And finally, did your mom ever visit Berlin or Germany again?
Yes, she did. She did a couple of times, and I think it was with very mixed feelings. We came to Berlin at the invitation of the mayor of Berlin in the 80s, and this was before the reunification, and it was complicated because my father with his communist sympathies, was was rather sort of taking the initiative, and that kind of overshadowed our responses. Really, we had to go into the east and go to the Palace of the Republic and so on. And no, I mean, I think, you know, for someone to return to Berlin after 60 years and see all those changes, it must have been almost unrecognizable for her. I can't really sort of say very much about, you know, what else it sort of meant to her.
Okay. Thank you very much for agreeing to be our guest tonight and for allowing us to show your film, which, as I understand, is the first time it is being shown in.
Yes, it is the first time. We were planning some screenings, but this was not possible because of the pandemic.
Yes. Well, then we're again doubly honored that we were able to bring this to an audience. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you to our audience members and to all the students and members of staff who helped organize this. As I said, this will be made available online, the recording. You will be given all the details. Everyone who was registered will be given the details via email. And we will also give you information of where to find more of Barbara's work if you want to look into it more, her artwork. And I think that's it. I wish everyone a pleasant evening, and thank you again for being there with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.